It's Taj of the Beat.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals to another episode of All the Above, the show that gives you an unstandardized take on education. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a middle and high school principal and a high school social studies teacher. And as always, I'm joined by...
What up, family? It's Manuel, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. I'm a high school history teacher in the Los Angeles area. This is year 17 in the classroom for me, and this, of course, is All the Above, your home for news and analysis of all matters pertaining to the world of education. Shout out to all of you who are watching on YouTube. We just recently crossed 600 subscribers, which, you know, for us, that's a big deal. It's only a two-person operation, and we are full-time educators. So shout out to y'all for supporting us on YouTube. And of course, if you're listening on the go, shout out to you too. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please consider rating us and reviewing us if you enjoy what you hear. Jeff, man, it's Valentine's Day weekend, man. You excited?
No. I've never really been into the whole Valentine's thing. I think it's, I don't mean to be a downer, but I think it's kind of just like, it's like just a commercial made up reason. You go to restaurants and it's like $75 for a hamburger and a drink.
But the hamburger is full of love, Jeff.
It's a love burger, yes.
Love burger, indeed.
No, I'm being a bit of a Scrooge right now, I know. But Valentine's Day is fine. I don't buy into the hype of it, I don't think.
I got you. Yeah. I'm kind of curious, since most schools are distance learning, at least most schools in California are distance learning, and those that aren't might be doing a hybrid situation. So I kind of wonder what happened to the Valentine's Day card industry this year. You know what I'm saying? Remember those little cheap cards that you get for your classmates and all that?
Yeah.
They must have taken a big hit this year.
Yeah.
So if you're not a fan of corporate Valentines, Jeff, then perhaps this is your year, because I'm sure they took a bit of a hit. So
I'm sure they did, and I'm sure I will be buying a card and some flowers and some. I'll be doing my part. I'm not a deadbeat Valentine, but it feels a little bit forced, right? It's a little bit forced.
Little bit. You are correct.
Yeah.
You are correct. What's not forced is the really dope humanizing conversations we have on this show as we explore different headlines in education.
Yes.
I know you like that transition. I know you like that. That was
smooth,
dope.
very smooth.
So Jeff, man, tell us what's on the agenda for this episode.
Well, Manuel, as usual, we got a good one for everybody. Today we have just a wonderful guest, compelling, powerful personality and figure in the field of education. He's been on our show before. We had him on about 2 years ago, back when he was in his first year as a principal of a new, an exciting new high school in Los Angeles, serving the South LA and Watts communities. He is none other than Rahh. A lot of people know him online as Principal Rahh, or perhaps as the revolutionary educator. He is making all kinds of power moves right now, has a new book out by the same title, Revolutionary Educator, and has a national conference coming up in early March 6th and 7th, the Revolutionary Educator Conference. So we're going to talk about the exciting work he's doing, a lot of the groundbreaking, powerful work, particularly through the lens of creating school cultures that cultivate and sustain and nurture our young people in ways that the traditional school system has not always done well. So we got Eamon coming back. It's going to be a great conversation. You definitely don't want to miss it.
Dope. Looking forward to that. Always nice to have returning guests. This, of course, is episode 65. So those of you who've recently encountered our show, we have 65 full episodes worth of news, headlines, and dope guests from all around. And if I do recall correctly, Principal Rahh was one of our first guests to really drive the YouTube numbers, because that sit down that you had with him, Jeff, where you asked him about his school in Watts, that still gets like plenty of views on our YouTube channel. So yeah, it's great to have him back. He was a first year principal back then. Now he's a big time vet, especially in this pandemic. I feel like we've all become like weathered veterans in education through the last just year. It's been wild. So looking forward to that conversation for sure. But up first, of course, we have our Do Now, where we take a look at recent headlines in the world of education. Stay tuned. All right, folks, now it's time for today's Do Now. Jeff, how are we going to do the Do Now today?
Well, Manuel, today we got a report card. We're gonna, dole out some grades, let kids and their parents cower in fear as the mail comes, or I guess today as the email comes, or as the login to your school's LMS awaits.
As the notification comes.
At the 5-week mark, we giving out some grades today.
All right, just insist on giving grades in the midst of a pandemic.
That's right. That's right.
All right, so let's do it, Jeff. The first grade we have for today is actually it's just blank. It's just incomplete. Just really don't know what grade to give this, Jeff.
Yeah, it's just I don't know.
It's just I don't know, and I feel like a lot of teachers can relate because like there are certain students who we've barely seen log into distance learning. There's 1 or 2 per class that maybe just familiar names, but you haven't seen them. And it's like, well, I don't want to give them an F, but they're not really here. And what can I do? And in this case, this story pertains to students who simply aren't there at the kindergarten level. Jeff, at the kindergarten level. So let's get into it. Now, we came by this story thanks to some good reporting from Karen D'Souza for EdSource. And she reported that during this pandemic, data is showing that enrollment is down significantly across California and across the rest of the country in kindergarten. The state's largest school district, Los Angeles Unified, had about 6,000 fewer kindergartners show up this fall compared to last year. Superintendent Austin Buettner noted that the biggest drops in kindergarten enrollment are generally in neighborhoods with the lowest household incomes. Early childhood advocates say kindergarten is a pivotal period that sets the stage for the rest of the elementary school years. While many students have likely suffered so-called learning loss during COVID, it just might have a far greater impact on incoming first graders simply because of where they are in their development. Missing early milestones in reading and math skills may set students up to fail as the workload increases in the upper grades, and experts really fear that unless this learning loss, I just hate using that phrase, but unless this learning loss is addressed, some children may struggle to keep up with their peers, which will widen the already troubling achievement gap between those who have money and those who are cash strapped. Jeannie Gorbach, president of the California Kindergarten Association, says, quote, "Next year's new students will need time to learn how to do in-person school. Teachers will have to explicitly teach how to behave in a structured learning environment. Next year will require teachers to do a lot of assessment and differentiation." Jeff, man, there's a lot of kindergartners missing, a lot of little ones. Where are the kids, Jeff? What's going on? What are we going to do?
Well, I don't know where the kids are. There are some theories. I think what's really powerful about what was, some of the issues that were raised there that actually pushes us a little bit. Because I know you and I have lots of feelings about the term learning loss and the kind of weaponization of learning loss. And I appreciate what this article is pushing us to think about here, which is at the youngest grades, right, where there is a profound difference developmentally between where you are at the age of 5 and where you are at the age of 6, that is not, nearly as pronounced when you're 16 and you become 17, right? You might grow from 16 to 17 physically, but in terms of your, ability to use words, let's say, right? Or your ability to write versus not being able to write, right? The developmental leaps that happen in a year's time at the younger ages, socially, academically, intellectually, emotionally, are huge. And so there are very real implications and likely somewhat negative implications of kindergartners kindergarten age students not experiencing kindergarten at that time. So I do think it's something we need to think about. I do think it's right for school systems and for educators to be doing some planning ahead to say, hey, if we have a much larger number of kids who are going to enter into first grade, let's say, in the fall, because in most systems around the country, what determines what grades you matriculate into isn't whether you did kindergarten or not. It's how old you are, and if you're at the threshold, you go into first grade, right? So we may be looking at the future where we have a bunch of first graders who haven't had kindergarten, and way more than is normally the case. So, first of all, hopefully all of these folks who have sat out of kindergarten or opted out of their local public schools kindergarten come back to the public school system, one. And two, when they do, I hope we can just take what I think is just the sort of normal, thoughtful approach we have, which is, where's a kid at when they come, and what are we going to do to support them on their way? And which is not labeling them deficient, identifying all of the ways in which they didn't learn everything they were supposed to learn during the ridiculous, horribly led pandemic, right? Like, there's a part of me that just doesn't care about learning loss at all, from the standpoint of, like, I don't think it changes our work with kids and families when they show up to us, let's say, in the fall, right? So, I appreciate what this article is raising. I do think we need to think differently about the very youngest students because of the developmental implications of not having any school and then showing up in first grade. But at the same time, I hope we can keep front and center that we are not and need not be in the business of finding new ways to label our students deficient and talk about how our unjust system has, resulted in an even more unjust new status quo, and then blame it on the kids and families and educators in the communities that are already most hurt by this unjust system. So that's my thinking, Manuel. What comes to mind for you as someone who teaches, people who are kindergartners a decade or more ago? What say you?
Yeah, so I get it. I really, really feel for parents out there who have kindergarten age kids, because it's like, the Zoom thing, the online school thing simply is not going to do it. It's just not going to do it. So for parents who had the opportunity or the privilege to opt out of a year and want to re-enroll their kids next year, I get it. I understand. It makes sense to me. What I think we really need to do just as a system is, along the lines of what you were saying, use some real common sense approaches in terms of placement of students. We need to have a lot more flexibility, and the folks who are quoted in this article spoke to this flexibility of placement. So not just automatically assigning a kid based on their calendar birth date, but trying to assign them more based on their developmental level. And there's some legislation in the works in California, at least, that would give parents the opportunity to hold their kids back a year if they didn't have kindergarten last year. So I think that's a great approach. I think a lot of flexibility is needed. In the first place, even before the pandemic, students are experiencing kindergarten in a variety of different ways. So let's not just pretend that, like, ordinarily every student is at the same level and it's like a lockstep on through the K-12 pipeline, K-16 pipeline. It's not like that. Students experience it differently, partially because of inequities in the system, partially because of just differences in their development. This mentality that we have, that it's a lockstep year by year growth for students, it's really outdated, and it's time to rethink that. But I would really love to see a lot of support for those early childhood educators. I'm talking pre-K, TK, kindergarten, even first grade educators. I really want a lot of support for them, because I think they are going to have to differentiate in ways that perhaps they have never had to before. And it would be great to see an infusion of resources and support at those grade levels to help students at their various developmental stages to be given the resource and the support that they need. And I don't want to see like one teacher in a room full of 30 kindergartners trying to figure out all the little differences that they have, because that's just not a winning formula for sure. So, and I also want to push back a little bit against all those who say like this is like perhaps a wasted year for those kindergartners who weren't in kindergarten, because I have high school students, and for a lot of them, when they unmute themselves in class, like I hear the children in the background, I hear all kinds of stuff like these. The article quoted somebody as saying like at that age, their brains are on fire, and I could hear it in the background. Like there's a lot of kids who are in really warm, supportive, loving households who are learning a lot. Maybe it's not the technical curriculum that they would normally learn in kindergarten, but it's not like it's a complete year lost. There's still a lot of growth, still a lot of development happening. I really just want to see some support for those early childhood educators and for families to make the decision on what grade to place their students in next year, next fall. And of
Yeah.
course, all this just highlights the need to really be planning for next fall. Like, what are we really going to do? Because there's so many different areas that need to be addressed. And if we don't seriously plan that, it's going to be a whole bunch of like just outdated approaches, and kids will just be placed into whatever grade their calendar birth date says they're supposed to be in. And it's just going to exacerbate all the inequities, of course, that we know were present before the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, Manuel. And it's the like essentializing of whiteness at the center of this conversation about learning loss that is also just driving me freaking nuts, man. Like the idea, just like you said, right, that like kids staying home with their parents for a year, and albeit parents are, obviously experiencing a whole lot of stress and, compromised by the pandemic conditions in lots of ways themselves, right? So that is real. But also staying home in a house where, frankly, and let's own up to some stuff here, Manuel, our school system does a worse job of caring for certain sets of kids than their home context does, right? And it's not just a couple of kids on the margins, right? So, like, I do not like this sort of deficit framing of poor Black and brown folks and their home life that is coming out of this whole conversation about learning loss, and it's being sort of sanitized with the term learning loss, but it is institutionalizing a whole new type of deficit mindset about kids, families, and communities, right? On the other side of the learning loss coin is maybe kids are going to come to school next year with like way more sense of self-esteem and support and emotional stability because they're actually getting more hugs, right?
Yeah.
they're getting, more time one-on-one with an adult who cares about them most, right? And so, it frustrates me that we're framing this issue this way, that we're totally ignoring everything that they have been learning, and framing it as a deficit mindset. And we're only doing this about poor Black and brown folks. We're not talking about, rich white kids in suburbs whose schools are in distance learning. We're just assuming that they have, great, wonderful, beautiful things happening. And, and that's going to, of course, contribute to the wonderful norm against which we should all compare ourselves. And, maybe what we need to be doing is saying, white people have some very deep, huge, embedded problems across all of white America in this country. And what are they doing with their children to make sure that we don't get any more, QAnon shaman guys running up into the Capitol with Confederate flags, right? Have they been working on that during distance learning? I'm not so sure. So, I'm ranting here, man, but this whole framing of this conversation pisses me off because it is pathologizing our communities and our youth in a way that is not correct and also just deeply problematic from a professional standpoint in education.
Yeah, facts. We love facts here on All of the Above. And Jeff, I remember there was some episode, I don't know, seasons ago, where one of the stories was about just how many preschoolers and kindergartners get suspended and how disproportionately those are Black kids specifically getting suspended. So it's like, well, no suspensions during this distance. Well, actually, there have been a few. I don't even want to get into that, but fewer suspensions during this distance learning time. So let's not just assume that like they'd be better off at school, because some of these students will be facing very negative experiences in the schoolroom. So yeah, man. All right. Schoolroom. Is that a word? Schoolroom? I don't think so. Classroom, schoolhouse, whatever.
Zoom rectangle.
Yes. Yeah. In any case, Jeff, we have other grades to get to. So what's the next grade on the report card?
All right, man. Well, next up on our report card is, this is a good grade. Well, it is a negative 155,000.
What?
Yeah. You not only did you get an F, you got an F plus, Manuel. Well, a negative F.
Well, it has been almost a year. We're approaching the 1 year anniversary of the give them all A's era. And, this is most certainly, I don't know what the hell the negative 155,000 is, but it's most certainly not an A. So This does not sound good, Jeff. What's going on?
It is definitely not good. Okay, so this grade comes to us from a story out of Cal Matters by Ricardo Cano. And here's what's going on, man. California's K-12 public school system enrollment has precipitously declined during the pandemic, dropping by a record 155,000 students, according to new state projections. That drop-off is about 5 times greater than California's annual rate of enrollment decline in recent years, and the state has predicted a similar rate of decline to continue. Education advocates say the enrollment drop is likely due to various factors, such as families withholding enrolling their children in kindergarten, as we were just talking about, to also a higher than usual rate of student dropouts. Los Angeles Unified, the state's largest school district, has seen an enrollment drop of about 6,000 kindergarten students, which is a 14% decline over the previous year. Advocates worry that the decline in enrollment, along with the declines in students who identify additional dollars through California's local control funding formula, or LCFF, could result in significant destabilization in school and district funding. Now, Governor Gavin Newsom's most recent budget included some financial protections for schools that would last through the end of this academic year, though some advocates have called on the state legislature to extend those protections to the additional pots of funding dependent on districts' count of low-income students, English learners, and foster youth. Manuel, the kids are disappearing. Now, there are still roughly 6 million students in California's public schools, so they're not all gone, but they're disappearing at perhaps an alarming rate from our public schools. Lots of factors at play during this crazy time of pandemic. But I'm curious to get your thoughts, man. Like, what does this mean for our schools? Is this a blip on the radar that we're going to just bounce back and recover from? Or is this, more of a lasting trend you think we need to worry about?
Yeah, well, I would say, first of all, don't tell the folks on the right, don't tell the far right YouTubers and podcasters, because this will feed into the narrative that California is a disaster. Everybody's leaving California, the taxes, the liberal policy, the liberal failures. And I get so many folks linking articles to me about people fleeing California, which just isn't the case. But anyways, so yeah, these numbers are troubling. 155,000 fewer students enrolled in California public schools. That's a giant number, but it's important to highlight that we don't really have a whole lot of data just on, the different reasons why. So some of it, of course, is the kindergarten situation, which we just talked about in our previous story. Some of it might be perhaps some students, enrolling, or some families opting for homeschooling in private schooling. Although, some private schools have seen drops in their enrollment and others have seen gains. So, we don't really know how those numbers are going to fall out when this is all said and done. And some of it is the dropouts. Somebody in the article was speaking about working with incarcerated youth and working with foster youth. And they said, they have a lot of students who have dropped out because they just simply could not deal with distance learning. And I'm thinking about a few students that we have at my school site that we've done home visits, we've done all that we can, and a few of these kids have been like, I just can't do it. Like, I just can't do school through a computer. I just can't. So I think the dropout numbers are worrisome to me. And I think that also helps explain some of this decline. And then, of course, you have just, variety of other possibilities that we don't know too much about because we're still in the midst of the pandemic. I think this highlights the need to really, really hit a home run in the fall. In the fall, we're going to be dealing with students who've experienced real loss. I saw a number yesterday that said something about 1 in 1,000 Californians have died due to COVID. We're going to be encountering students who perhaps took a year off, perhaps just simply did not log into any of their classes. We're going to be dealing with students whose parents opted out of school for the year, in the kindergarten situation. We're going to be dealing with a lot. And it's incredibly important to hit a home run in the fall and really, really welcome students back to a positive experience, a humanizing experience, and not just act like we didn't just go through a terrible pandemic. I think I wouldn't call this a blip, but I would be shocked if these numbers sustain through next year and beyond as schools return to normal. I think the pandemic has everything to do with this number being so big, and we have to bring these students back next year in a way that engages them and meets them where they're at without having them feel bad about what they might have missed or how far behind they're going to be and all that negative stuff all that deficit thinking that was just discussed in our previous story. It is troubling. It is troubling for sure. It is. But we have 6 million students right now who need our help and need our support. And in the fall, hopefully we'll have more than just those 6 million as we get some of these other students back. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, what you said really resonates with me around the importance of hitting a home run in the fall, right? I think my, albeit unscientific, assessment of what's happening is not that there is a permanent mass exodus, at least yet, from our schools. I think there's probably bits and pieces of different things happening, right? Younger students, parents opting to just keep them home rather than have to struggle with, chaperoning your 5-year-old on distance learning all day, right?
Right.
Or opting to still keep your kid in childcare, which in many cases was still open during the pandemic when when schools were not, if you had to work, right? So I think there's a slice of it that's that. The boost in dropouts for older students right now is definitely disturbing, but also hopefully some of that may have been driven by, this sounds bad to say hopefully, but where I'm going with that is I know for some teenagers, the economic pressure to be a provider for the family has gone up as parents have lost jobs. And if we could experience either a better social safety net and or an improving economy where adults can get their jobs back, that may actually free up some of those young people to return to school, right? So maybe not all of those dropouts were what we might traditionally think of as dropouts, which is like, kids who are like, I'm done with school, maybe more kids who are like, I have to work, right? Hopefully there'll be some, potential gains there. There had been a lot of speculation about like our kids, leaving the public system to go to private schools because in many parts of the state, private schools are open. And I think, it looks like although the declines in enrollment in private schools are maybe a bit smaller than they are in public schools, overall, the private school system is not seeing gains in enrollment. So that doesn't seem to be it either. And, the reality is also California has declining birth rates, right? Some of that driven by just the high cost of living here. And so people who are here have fewer kids. So I think there's a lot of factors, probably many more than we just stated as well. But my sense is we haven't lost everyone, right? And I agree, we need to really get it right when we bring people back, especially any of our young people where there's, where we're sort of talking about the margins of the system anyways, right? And like kids and families who may be ready to just be like, well, if you can't serve me well, like I'm out of here, I'll try the charter school or I'll try whatever, So I think we have an opportunity to really bring folks back. We're going to have to do some things differently, and we definitely aren't going to be able to start with like, let's diagnose how deficient you and your kid and your family has been for the last year during this, super stressful pandemic. So we have an opportunity. I hope we seize it so as to not have this be like just a permanent and super destabilizing effect on schools. Yeah,
man. I hope we seize it.
Yeah.
I'm not hopeful that we will, but I hope we do. And there's a difference there. And and it is important to point out, like California's cost of living is insane. Like it's crazy. So there are a lot of families who have moved out of California because like it's very difficult for just the average family to buy a home or to ever aspire to buy a home at this point. So there is some of that for sure.
What's so funny about that, Manuel?
What's that?
This morning, I was occasionally I just poke around on Zillow. No endorsement, but just like to try to get a sense of, am I getting any closer to being able to afford a home in the part of Los Angeles where I live? And the answer is most decidedly not even close. And I saw something today that was just purely bananas. Now, I hadn't put any filters into the Zillow machine, if for anybody who has used it in the past. Just, looking around to see in this area what's available. And I kid you not, Manuel, there was a house, we're going to loosely call this a house, that looks like a royal palace. 16 bedrooms, 19 bathrooms, $38 million, okay?
Damn.
Now, I don't know if for a 16-bedroom house that's expensive or not. I've never been in the market for a 16-bedroom house.
Right.
I didn't even realize such a thing existed here. Outside of like royalty in England or whatever, right? But yeah, I mean, if you got 38 million bucks, there's a nice house for you here, apparently.
Yeah, and that, I mean, obviously that house is like, there are giant mansions across California, like a lot of states. And, that's, but if you're just a regular family, you just want a regular 2 or 3 bedroom, single family home, just the old school California type home. I mean, it's crazy. A home sold up the street from where I live, that's just a regular ass house, just very regular. Like when I say regular, 3 bedrooms, garage, 2 bath, like the average, California single family home. And it sold for 800 something thousand. So it's like, who could afford what regular working person can afford that for just a really basic house? So yeah, there are people who have opted to move away, especially as jobs have gone remote and online. So like if you don't have to be next to your workplace anymore, then why not move to Arizona or somewhere where you could get something for a lot cheaper? So there is some of that. I don't know. There's so much going into these numbers that I think we just have to wait and see how it plays out and make sure that we hit a home run in the fall for the students who are present, no matter who they are, but especially those who might not have had much formal schooling experience this year. So yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
All right. That about does it for today's Do Now, folks. Up next, we have a very, very dope seminar with Principal Rahh, and we're gonna get into a lot of dope discussions about his work as a principal and his work in transforming school culture. All right, so you don't want to miss that. Stay tuned. What up, AOTA family? Now, we really appreciate your support. Some of you have reached out letting us know that you would love to leave a 5-star review and do a little write-up, but you can't seem to find it on Apple Podcasts because it's kind of buried there. So just so you know, if you are using Apple Podcasts, if you go to your library, which has all the shows that you follow, if you click on our show and then scroll, you got to scroll all the way down to the bottom. At least on my phone, on my version, that's how you do it. Scroll all the way down to the bottom, then you'll see the reviews there, and you could leave us that 5 stars. And if you have a moment to write a little write-up, that would be great. These sorts of things help us show up in more educator searches when folks are out there trying to find podcasts to listen to about education, and your support goes a long way. Thank you so much. Now back to the show.
All right, folks, welcome to today's seminar. We are so excited to have you here with us today because we have an incredible guest who is back here with us for his second time on All the Above. We have the powerful, the compelling Principal Rahh, also known as Principal Rahh, for those of you who follow him online. Welcome back, Rahh, to All the Above.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate you for having me.
Yeah. So let's run down Principal Rahh's bio here and tell you a little bit more about him. Rahh is the proud founding principal of the University Pathways Public Service Academy, also known as the U, which is a public high school located in the Watts community of Los Angeles. Eamon has spent his 15 years working in education, serving in the schools of Watts and South Los Angeles. He began his career as a special education teaching assistant and has served in many roles, including teacher, dean, and restorative justice coordinator on his way to becoming a principal. Most recently, he has published a book, or will be publishing a book. It'll be out real soon, folks, called Revolutionary School Culture, 6 Principles Unlocking Your School's Hidden Treasure, and is hosting the upcoming Revolutionary Educator Conference, which is taking place on March 6th and 7th. He is born and raised in Compton and comes from a family of educators, and Eamon is a proud graduate of Cal State University at Dominguez Hills. Eamon Rahh, so glad to have you with us, and I'm going to kick it over to Manuel for our first question.
Yeah, so thank you so much for being on the show again. It's been about 2 years, and when you were on our show previously, we were like in the actual studio, in the physical studio, and a lot has changed since then. You were a first-year principal back then, and your school has grown a lot since then. The world has changed. Obviously, the pandemic has pushed everyone towards distance or hybrid learning, and so much has gone on. So I guess we want to start by just asking, how have you, like as a school leader and your school more in general, how have y'all adapted to these changes? Like how have y'all grown and approached all that's happened since your last time on the show?
Yeah, I think it's important for where we are at. We had we have a firm rooted belief in the village, right? And as a first year principal, we were already doing a lot of technology, building a community with technology and social media and virtual learning type of thing. So when the pandemic happened, we were able to pivot a little bit easier than maybe other schools because our students were already connecting with us through social media platforms. They were already using, social media and virtual responses, calling responses type of activities that we kind of created. So it made it a little bit easier for us to make the transition. Like we always say that the best cure for any disease is prevention. So I like to believe that as a first year, second year school, not knowing that we knew the pandemic was going to happen, but we had preventative measures that helped us with the transition from another school that possibly never used social media, never had these type of mechanisms in place to connect, to engage, right? To really be intentional about engagement. So it made our transition easier. So as of right now, we have really great engagement. We just did our virtual pep rally using StreamYard and YouTube, where we had students connecting with, and we had guest speakers popping in. We had pre-recorded hype rally videos where we're just trying to innovate and trying to be something that students can engage with and connect with and still have some form of love for learning, which for the most part has been great, and also inspire our educators to be innovative so they can also have that why, because many educators right now has been struggling with their why right now. It's been hard on them. So we wanted to make sure that we had a place in a village that could support educating and raising our young people.
Yeah, and to that kind of larger issue of like how you innovate around creating and sustaining a powerful, compelling school culture in the midst of a a global pandemic when you can't be next to all of the young people, you have an offering to the world coming out here in the form of a new book entitled Revolutionary School Culture, The 6 Principles of Unlocking Your School's Hidden Treasure. Oh, there it is. Okay. Now, first of all, I just have to say congratulations on publishing. That would be an accomplishment under any circumstances, but to do so as a principal, a sitting principal, I don't know where you find the time, man. So congrats, congrats on that. I'm wondering if you can just kind of, give us some insight into, you've kind of carved out the niche for yourself as the revolutionary educator and, have a lot of, I think, experience and wisdom around creating powerful school cultures and revolutionizing school culture. What does that mean to you? What does that look like for folks who are hungry to try to do something similar?
Absolutely. Man, listen, the time, it's been crazy. My wife, late nights, weekends, summers has been dedicated to this. I actually started writing a book right when I became principal, so about 4 years ago, and just took experience from my experience as a restorative justice coordinator, where I was supporting and helping principals at one point help revolutionize and implement restorative justice practices, right? Because I feel that this equity work and this relationship work is the key to unlocking hidden treasures, but not just with young people, but with communities, with educators across the nation. So the key to this is I outlined 6 principles, is really having a dream and a vision and setting the stage for that. Like, for example, at our school, our mission is for 100% of our students to achieve self-actualization, right? That means that we have to be rooted in the humanistic approach to learning. And we describe it as we have a humane-oriented leader, right? A humane-oriented leadership, and then we have humane-oriented teaching. And these principles align to that, which helps unlock each student's individual treasure, which help them actualize, where if now we get these group of young people to self-actualize, we want them to then hopefully get to community actualization. So this framework is really diving into how to build an aspirational environment for young people, not just in person, but also virtually. How to build a true community school. There's been a lot of rhetoric around, hey, we need community schools, but what does that look like, and how does that feel? And we really are big on authenticity, and we're really big on uh, uh, collective work and responsibility, where everyone does a little, where no one person has to do a lot. So all these approaches helps us revolutionize education. And just to describe the differences, the evolutionary process in education is naturally going to happen. That's gradual, right? It takes time for that evolution to happen. And I think that's been the framework for education for so long. But in society, revolutionary things happen with technology, with vehicles, with industries all the time. And it makes an immediate impact on society. And this whole term of being a revolutionary educator and revolutionizing education is the same, take that same construct of identifying problems and create a solution that makes an immediate impact that can change the trajectory of that evolutionary process, right? And it doesn't mean that you're just going neglectful trying to speed up the process, because evolution is going to happen. But it's the framework of like, can we turn something around overnight? Absolutely. Does that mean the whole ship is going to turn around overnight? Absolutely not. Right. So that's the whole point of this revolutionary education, the revolutionary book, the revolutionary conference is how can we make an immediate impact, immediate positive impact on young people, our communities, and in the classroom and in schools and in districts, while understanding the reality that exists. Right. And that we're opposed. So that's it in a nutshell.
Dope. And for folks listening or watching, I just want to say we'll link episodes beneath this one, previous episode with Principal Rahh and his one-on-one, where he goes into more detail about like the roots of his school and more about the U and what makes it so special. But as far as this book goes, I'm waiting on my copy, waiting on my signed copy. But I have heard that in there you go into what Maslow's before Bloom's actually looks like and what it actually means. And first of all, shout out to the Blackfoot Nation, who of course were the foundation of Maslow's hierarchy. He studied them when developing this hierarchy. We want to know from you, like, what does that mean in practice, and why is that important for revolutionizing a school culture?
And it goes back to really what I said too, is prevention is the best cure to any disease, right? So that means if you're somebody who's trying to get healthy, you want to prevent yourself from actually getting the disease by eating well and doing those different things. So we understood when we were developing the work is trauma exists. There's a barrier with relationships. There's a barrier with cultural relevance. There's a barrier, like Marcus Garvey say, a student that doesn't know their history is like a tree without roots. There's no way that it can grow. So if we know those things and we understand that, then we go into a framework of URR. URR is you must understand, you must recognize, and then you must respond. So when we're talking about Maslow's and self-actualization, we must have, and we're all familiar with it. You'll get a PD on Maslow, all those great things, you understand it. But then most people don't get to the second R, or the first R, which is recognize. And recognize is diving into possible solutions, right? Coming up with possible solutions. And then you get to the third, or the last part, which is the second R, is actually respond. And that's testing it out to see if it works. And then once you nail it, you scale it. So for us, I wanted to make sure that we had a family atmosphere at our school and not a team atmosphere. So instead of calling our assemblies, we call them family. So every Monday morning, we developed something called family, where the whole school come together, and it's about breaking bread. It's about building relational trust. It's about student-to-student relationships. It's about inspiration. It's about activation, bringing in guest speakers, and it's called family. And the language for our young people is, hey, Monday, it's time for family. They start saying that to each other. It's time for family. The second thing that we did was we changed the name from our advisory. Many schools have advisory or homerooms, and we called it kinship. Right? And kinship made it seem like, hey, no, we're building on this family. So our teachers say, hey, I have kinship. Students say, I have kinship. What is kinship? This is a relational trust that we have. And we start to do restorative practices, community building circles, presentations of learning, so they can work on self-efficacy, emotional regulation, how to deal with anxiety, finding themselves and purpose and meaning to life for them, right? That's kinship. Then after that, we came up with a third thing. We developed what's called a house system. And a house system is similar to Harry Potter. We tried to create a fraternity and a sorority feeling on our campus. And we developed 4 houses: the house of motivation, the house of friendship, the house of advocacy, and the house of courage. These houses helped build those values that we wanted. And now it's like a constructive competition, we like to say. But these are items in which were possible solutions that we implemented, and we nailed it. We absolutely nailed it, because it's gotten us results to have one of the best tier 1 engagement data, which is attendance. We have contributed to over a 96% attendance rate. We've also had 100% current graduation rate right now, coming out the gates. And it's all because we focus in on trauma, restorative practices, humane-oriented teaching, humane-oriented leadership, and it has yielded us those type of results. And that's the impact that's had on our community and our young people.
Yeah. I mean, those are some powerful data points there. And, doing that in any context, I think would be noteworthy. Doing that in the context of the community that you serve, which, I think is pretty undeniable as one of the most and longest underserved communities in the city of Los Angeles, in like every possible imaginable way, is important, not just as an example of what can be done, but also, as a real service to the community. So definitely want to congratulate you on that. Something that I noticed mentioned in your, revolutionary school culture thinking is this concept of redefining the role of teacher. Mm-hmm. And, we exist in a system in education that is a massive bureaucracy, right? There are rules on top of rules on top of rules, and many of those exist for good reasons, right? But at the same time, they can often be very confining, right? And so, in a context where there can seem at least like so many barriers to doing things differently, I'm wondering if you can give us some insight into like how do you conceive of refining or redefining this, this sort of role of teacher, and what does that mean to folks who are like, I'd love to redefine, what it means, but like I got 75, different compliance measures that make me stay within this box.
Yeah, I think it's important to bring the reality to the forefront. The reality is, we are more than educators, unfortunately, right? We are the definition of that teacher, where it's just like, hey, I could just come in, teach math, teach the standards, and go home. No, like many educators across the nation, if you didn't feel it before, during the pandemic, you realize that you are doing social work, you're doing quasi-parenting, you're the critical friend, you're the passion worker, and also teaching, right? And also leading, and also doing so much more. And you're more than an educator. It should be highlighted. And redefining that is being able to understand the reality that exists, that hyper accountability exists in the bureaucracy of education, right? The word accountability has been used so much that we need more accountability, we need more accountability, we need more accountability. And then it's created this hyper accountability on many of our schools, especially schools that are quote unquote high Title I and in urban communities that's culturally diverse. Is hyper accountability that then connects to hyper standardization, and not just with tests, but just with a standard on what things should look like, right? What things should feel like and what things should be like, which has created a box that suppresses culture. It suppresses cultural relevant pedagogy. It suppresses all the equity work, because you're so focused on the hyper accountability. And it's like that framework. I'm so focused on getting the great lesson plan that I forget to have a great lesson. right? And I think it's important for us to redefine and measure what matters, right? Like in open up innovation, open up the opportunity for creativity, open up the opportunity to redefine what success looks like. And I'll give you an example. Let me explain. So during this time, we have been struggling. Our schools across the nation have been struggling with engagement. And there's been students that, especially at the high school level, there are students that are working, doing many different things. How we can be so creative with how we engage with taking that experience, work-based learning experience, and bringing how science relate to the workforce, how math relate to the workforce, how using that experience to learn from, right? Using that experience to gain value from. And but the hyper accountability suppresses that. You can't even think about how we can use that and leverage that because we're so focused in the traditional norm of hyper accountability and hyper standardization. So this redefinition is understanding that exists, the hyper accountability, hyper standardization, and unlocking the hidden treasure, which I highlight, of redefining what you as an educator, your role as an educator, and your mission as an educator, so you can start thinking about education in a different forefront. Schooling is different than education.
That's dope. And I think this is a time where a lot of educators out there are reflecting on their purpose and reflecting on their why, and really coming to terms with, what they aspired to be versus what ended up happening when they entered the system and this hyper accountability that you mentioned. So yeah, I'm sure that's going to resonate. I'm sure that resonates with a lot of our viewers and a lot of our listeners for sure. Now, you have a conference coming up, revolutionaryeducator.com, for folks who want to learn more and consider attending. And how about you give us the big picture about that? What's going to go on at this conference? Why should folks attend? What are they going to learn, and how will they be impacted?
No, thank you. The Revolutionary Educator Conference is going to be amazing because it's taken all the things that I've said, but you're getting immediate impact that you could take in the classroom. So we have curated some of the most revolutionary educators across the nation, from K through 12, not even K through 12, from K to higher ed. That's why it's a 2-day conference, from the whole extension, because I think there's been a disconnect also with what needs to be also revolutionized in community colleges and in universities to make sure and ensure that this pipeline of power that we're trying to create for young people in our communities exists, and it doesn't stop once they leave high school, right? So this conference is to get you practical strategies for if you're a kindergarten teacher that you can make an impact. If you're a principal, you're going to be able to make an impact. If you're a district leader, you're going to learn from that. If you're a professor, we got 2 professors that's going to be talking about their work and how this connects to revolutionizing even in higher ed. And this whole conference is activating liberation pedagogy, right? And it's a place for collective healing, like bringing classrooms together, not dividing them, bringing districts together, not dividing them, and bringing communities and classrooms and all those things together, not dividing them, through activating liberation pedagogy, which is internalizing and activating. So we're super excited about it. And we're bringing culture into it. We got performances. It's going to be an experience like no other, and we're super excited about it.
Yeah. Eamon, final question for you in our time together today. I have the privilege of working with a broad diversity of school leaders across not only Los Angeles, but across the country. And, something I've seen as kind of a theme to the last year, this sort of COVID year of schooling, is that the stress, the challenge of this time on school leaders, on principals and assistant principals, I think has kind of gone under the radar, right? Mm-hmm. Because everyone is now like cast into the classroom via Zoom with their teachers, and really starting to recognize like, man, teachers have a tough job right now, which is, of course, they do. Yep. But the stress and the pressure on principals during this time, is maybe less visible. And something I appreciate about you is your sense of kind of optimism and seizing the possible, even in the face of challenge. I'm wondering if you have any words you might want to share with other school leaders out there who are exhausted, feeling the brunt of all the uncertainty, trying to take care of their teachers, but then sort of like, well, who's taking care of me, right? I wonder if you have any words you might want to share to other school leaders out there who are, just trying to make it through this difficult
Yeah.
time in our profession.
You know, it's been rough for I think everyone in education, right, during this time, because that the vicarious trauma that exists amongst us as educators is real. As principals, as school leaders, we take in it from the families and parents, we take it in from students, we take it in from teachers, we take it in from our own personal, and a lot of us are the problem solvers, and we take it and we take it in, and we become stressed, and we have those vicarious experiences. And I would say, this redefining of educator is also redefining your role as a leader, right? And understanding that in this time, less is more in a sense of making something that's complex and being able to simplify it will help bring clarity and help bring resolve to you as an educator. What you're doing right now is great and it's more than enough. Take time. And, I want to say this about self-care too. Self-care isn't a destination, it's an ongoing process, right? It isn't just like, oh, I'm going to self-care on a vacation. Self-care manifests in everyday life practical things that we do. If it's waking up and taking time to have your daily coffee, or if it's waking up to say, you know what, I'm gonna go on that daily run, or if it's at night, I'm gonna do my reading. It's being consistent in what you feel and what you are interconnected with, right? Or what you're connected with. And I would say for that educator, for that leader, take time to audit yourself off of what is your self-care practices, so you can also message that to your teachers, so their teachers can also message that to the students. And now you see that we've created a village around how we're going to navigate through this pandemic. So with those practices, that will change your community, that will change your school, and ultimately change the world. And audit yourself if you are conditioned to the hyper accountability and the hyper standardization. That the symptoms of that is hyper exhaustion. Right? You become exhausted because you're fighting against an existing reality that is devastating and has wiped out the best of us. So take time for yourself for sure.
Yeah. Well, Eamon Rahh, Principal Rahh, thank you so much for those words and for sharing your thoughts with us today. Congratulations again on the upcoming release of your new book and your upcoming conference, Revolutionary Educator Conference, March 6th and 7th. We'll have the link below here for folks to check out more about that. And just want to appreciate you for joining us today and for giving up some of your time to be here with us on All the Above.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate your platform. Appreciate all the work you're doing, making an impact in education. You guys are rock stars.
All right. Thanks again. And folks, that's it for today's seminar. Next up is our class dismissed. Stay tuned.
All right, folks, we have reached that point in the episode where we like to give shout outs to folks doing wonderful things in the world of education. And this is the segment we call Class Dismissed. So, Jeff, before we get up out of here, who are we shouting out?
Well, Manuel, that's an excellent question. And the honest answer is I'm not exactly sure, but it is somebody or somebodies within the now Betsy DeVos-free U.S. Department of Education who are taking on the work of dismantling some of the more criminal and absolutely horrible and unethical practices and systems that were put into place under her 4-year reign of terror at the U.S. Department of Education. And this is just a recent story here in January of 2021, the same week of the inauguration. The U.S. Department of Ed has put forth a proposal to essentially ban one of the more notorious accreditation agencies that had issued accreditation for fraudulent for-profit colleges. So folks out there might remember that we have done some discussion in the past of Reagan National University, this for all intents and purposes, seems like a university that didn't really exist, based out of South Dakota, that like had an address which was like an empty storefront, right, with no chairs and stuff. But this accreditation agency, which is called the Accrediting Council for Independent Colleges and Schools, was the accrediting agency for Reagan National University, was the accrediting agency for Corinthian colleges, also brought up on on charges for defrauding students, right? So this agency, in a report released in late January from the Education Department, has been recommended for termination of its recognition as an accreditor by the U.S. Department of Ed. So hopefully, Manuel, what this means is that, thousands and thousands of folks out there, working adults, young people who are like trying to get a leg up in our economy, trying to make it, will not continue to be defrauded by colleges that are given accreditation when they are, criminal enterprises, right? So this is a shout out. We got to figure out who wrote that memo, perhaps, but whoever it is, props to you. This is an important first step in undoing some of those just crazy things that were happening under Betsy DeVos's tenure, and hopefully makes the sea of colleges that people are choosing from less shark infested, if you will.
That's a beautiful way to put it. That's a really nice way to put it. And if memory serves me correctly, I think the Obama administration had initially gotten rid of this accrediting agency's power, and then the Trump administration, in their effort to retrofit the swamp, brought it back. So it's good to see that it's gone again. And
I like that, retrofit the swamp, man.
I mean, that's what it was.
I thought they were going to drain it, though, man. Well, it was going to drain, but now you say they just retrofit.
Yeah, just so that there could be more muck and more craziness in there. So that's promising. I'll take that in this era of a lot of not so great stories out there, not so great and uplifting stories out there about the world of education. It's nice to see that there is work being done to try to rectify some of the trash of the previous administration. So that's great. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us this episode. We really love and appreciate y'all. We hope you enjoyed what you heard or what you watched. Do consider giving us that thumbs up or that 5-star review. It goes a long way. All right, folks, we'll catch you next time.